Caregivers, have you ever felt like nothing, I mean nothing is going right? Well, cheer up and welcome to Dave the Caregiver's Caregiver radio program, where you'll learn how to avoid that dreaded thing called caregiver burnout and how to survive the grief process. You know, with roughly 100 million caregivers in the U.S. and Canada alone, that's about a third of the population. That means that everyone probably knows someone caring for a loved one. Join Dave and his guests now and every Wednesday at noon Pacific Time as they discuss avoiding caregiver burnout and surviving grief. So find a comfortable place to relax, kick up your feet, and prepare to feel better and to receive practical tips and tools that you can start using immediately to get you through today and every day so you can survive your tomorrows. But not just survive, but to live life fully and abundantly. Yes, you heard me right. That is a possible goal to achieve. And now, here's your host, Dave Nassani.
There it is.
From Los Angeles, the Big Alley, welcome to all my listeners out there in Radioland. I'm Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver, coming to you live from the global network of Blog Talk Radio, as well as iTunes and a bunch of other ones. The list is so long, I just have to memorize them one day. Anyway, and of course on our website, caregiverscaregiver.com. And our goal here is to do our very best to help you avoid that dreaded thing called caregiver burnout. And we have an exciting show planned for you today with my lovely co-host who is back, Adrienne Gruberg of the Caregiver Space. We missed you so much. I don't know how many months.
Hi, Adrienne.
Hi there. It's good to be back.
I don't know how many months you've been gone, Adrienne, but it seems like a year.
It
so
does.
I just want to say welcome back, and we're
Thank
so
you.
sorry for your fall. You had the knee surgery, then you had a fall, then you had to do it all over again, and now you're just
recuperating.
They call it you're eating it, whatever that means. Well, anyway, our goal is to do the very best to help you avoid that dreaded thing called caregiver burnout. And our guest today is Jim Dowda, registered nurse, a male registered nurse, which makes him even more special. And you will not want to miss this show because he's going to be talking about a whole bunch of stuff that caregivers need to hear, because he's the guy who notices the caregivers when the patient is there and the caregiver is interacting with them. And sometimes he just has to bite his tongue because he sees things that are just horrific. And we're going to talk about all that stuff. And if you're one of the guilty parties of what he's been talking about, then you need to hear this. So, again, I'm your host, Dave Nassani, and this show is caregivers of every single kind. By the way, we won't give any names. It'll all be anonymous. And the one thing we know about caregivers is they are caring and selfless and sacrificial souls, but they have this tiny little problem. They're very prone to burnout because they tend to put everyone else's needs above their own. Sound familiar? That's why 30% die, actually, before their loved ones do, and 60% become hospitalized, needing a caregiver of their own. Now, just think about the caregivers that you know in your life. Either they are in one of those two categories, or they're in the minority of that 10% that are just healthy and doing all the good, right stuff, reading my books, going on the caregiver space, and being in support groups, and just being a very good caregiver and taking care of themselves and putting their needs first and all that stuff. Anyway, we can learn something from the airlines. You know, they tell us in the event of an emergency, put your oxygen mask on first before you attempt to help your loved one with their mask. Hello, that sounds so selfish, but it's so necessary. So it's called survival, folks. Now, we also talk about grief and loss and the devastating effects it can have on us. Anytime we suffer a loss, we go through a grief process. It could take weeks or months or years. Some people never get over it. Everyone is different. But if you feel like you're ready to move on in your grief, we can help. But unfortunately, folks, there's only one way out of the grief process. You got to go through it. There's no shortcuts. Can't go around it, over it, under it. Got to go through it. Sorry, I didn't make the rules. But hopefully we can help you through your grief and your loss if you happen to feel like you're stuck and you're ready to move on with life. And I do want to take this time and thank my wonderful, wonderful last week's guest, Mona Z. Dowda. Yes, there is a relationship to Jim Dowda. I think they got married a little while ago. And they are just doing an awesome job. She's a physical therapist assistant. He's a male nurse, and together they're just a force to be reckoned with. Anyway, her interview last week was speaking about the pain that nobody wants. This sounds like a great interview for you, Adrienne. Make sure you
Yeah,
listen
it
to this one
does.
because she's a physical therapist, and you're going through physical therapy right now.
Yes, I
Maybe
am.
we'll sneak Mona in just to give you some advice in the middle of the interview because I know she's listening. And just a reminder, you can listen to that interview and all of them right here on our website, caregiverscaregiver.com. And just an update on me. Just got back from Tucson, Albuquerque, and Miami, which
Wow.
Jim and Mona do live in Miami. Got a chance to visit with them in addition to being on a show in Miami. And in about a month, so we get a little break here, we're going to, Charlene and I, New York. Hey, Adrienne, we should hook up. We're going to be
You
right there in your
are?
neighborhood. Yes.
Oh,
April 24th to May 5th, I think it is.
wow.
We'll have plenty of opportunities to connect. And you know what? I'm going to be speaking at NASDAQ. My picture is going to be on the Jumbotron, Charlene as well. And we're just going
Wow.
to be all over Times Square for the world to see. And
Are you going
we
to be
definitely
on Good
got
Morning America?
we're going to be also meeting with 100 national producers of Good Morning America, the Today
Okay.
Show, Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, all of them. So
Great.
pray that we get accepted, as we pitch them, because
Yeah.
it's a lot harder to get on those shows because they
Yeah.
have the ability to put movie stars on. So, how do you compete with Brad Pitt, But, I feel like we have a timely message, and my wife is much better looking than Brad Pitt. So I'm just believing it's going to happen. But enough of me. All right. Big welcome to my guest, Jim Dowda, registered nurse.
Thank you.
Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Dave. I'm well, thanks. How are you doing?
Thank you for being so patient during that long introduction. It normally isn't that long, but we had a lot to catch up with.
I do want to say that I think you are better looking than Brad Pitt. So,
well, I do too, but I'm prejudiced, and so I just have to be humble and
it's a dignified look at the.
But flattery will get you everywhere, Jim. So just keep it up. Why don't you take a minute or two? I like to ask people to just introduce yourself. I like to say, just who is Jim Dowda and why in the heck was he put on this earth?
Well, my name is Jim. I'm an RN on a cardiopulmonary unit at a local hospital. And that's a unit that deals with heart attacks, pneumonias, ventilators, and a whole smorgasbord of other things. We're also a unit that is a catch-all if they need a bed. And I've been a nurse for quite a while. It's very gratifying. I enjoy it, and you see people in a light that you normally don't see. When people come into the hospital, many times the walls they have up come down, and it's very intriguing because I used to be a visiting nurse in New York, and I noticed pretty quickly that when I had a patient in the hospital, they would behave one way, but when I go to the home, they would behave totally different because the walls go back up. And it's really intriguing. But yeah, that's it. I've been a nurse for quite a while. It's good.
Well, you're in Adrienne's neighborhood. Yeah, they used to live in New York, but upstate New York, right?
Yeah, well, I was in the Schenectady, Albany area, Adrienne.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
But
a lot of good stuff going on up there spiritually.
Yeah.
And he has relatives in Staten Island, so he would make it down to the city periodically.
Right.
But I'm so excited, Adrienne. I've been planning this trip to New York for many, many months, and it just occurred to me right now that we can get together. I know, isn't it? I'm just not as sharp as I used, but I'm not going to confess it. I'm going to proclaim. The Bible has a verse and it says, my youth will be restored like the eagle. I will walk and not grow weary. I will run and not be faint. And that's a verse for both of us, Adrienne, especially you right now.
Because
you need to walk and run.
Weary. Hey, can I take that verse too?
Yeah, you can have it too.
Can't hurt.
So, Jim, thank you for sharing that. I asked you to write down 10 things that you noticed about caregivers and how they react to their patients, et cetera. Why don't you start with number one and just talk a little bit about that?
Sure, Dave. For starters, I wasn't aware of the statistics you shared about the burnout, the death rates of the caregivers. That's very intriguing.
Mm.
But in my experience, I can see how that can happen. But anyway, the first thing that struck me when you were talking about it is as a nurse, I firmly believe that we are patient advocates. That means that we are there to defend, to educate, to protect the patient. And the reason why that's so important is that often these people either they can't protect themselves or they don't know what to do, and that's where the nurses come in.
Mm.
And some nurses believe that we're there to protect the hospital or the doctor, but we're not. We're there to protect the patient. The patient is the most vulnerable. And in that, I think one of the best things that we can do is to give information because I have found over the years that information reduces a lot of anxieties. Simply telling the patient what a test is for or the purpose of it, or is it painful, or the preparation we may have to do for it. And even if it's not pleasant or even if it's painful, if they understand the necessity for it, people are usually very patient and they can do it. It's the fear of the unknown that's really the worst part. So, yeah, that's one of the
Now,
biggest things I see.
I got to address the elephant in the room because, as you know, some people make fun of male nurses, right? I remember that movie, Meet the Parents, right?
Yes.
And the character was a male nurse, and his future father-in-law kept making fun of him. Well, you're not a real nurse, and why don't you address that and let people know that male nurses are real nurses, and maybe some of the funny things that you've gone through, because maybe someone is meeting a male nurse for the first time. Maybe they've never been to the hospital in decades. What kind of reactions have you gotten?
Well, actually, what's really funny is that I tend not to have a negative reaction because I'm twice everybody's size. Um, and I'm 6'1", and I look like a boxer or a wrestler. People have asked me if I was a drug dealer, a cop, a wrestler,
Or a
I
bouncer?
say, or a bouncer, yeah. And they said, no, I'm a nurse. They say, you're kidding. No, I am a nurse.
So they're not
And
about to make fun of you.
no, they don't. They don't. But I have found over the years that people will often treat you the way you conduct yourself. If you
Mm-hmm.
conduct yourself with confidence, people will treat you with respect. If you conduct yourself with insecurity or shamefacedness, people will treat you with a lack of respect. That's just how I've found. And I've also found that when you look people in the eye and you listen to them, you're direct and you're firm but you're kind. Um, over the years, I found that is one of the best ways to deal with the issue. If you respect yourself, the people often will respect you.
Well, that's a great attitude. Don't you agree, Adrienne?
I know, I know I've written about it from a slightly different standpoint. I agree with you completely. I've also talked about how you present yourself. If you go in looking like a professional, if you
Hmm.
look like you respect, the hospital system and you're a professional, so to speak, as a caregiver, they respect you and they give you the answers that you're asking for if you know what to ask for. It makes a huge difference how you present yourself.
Yes,
So
and
yeah.
Adrienne has had a lot of experience lately with nurses and stuff.
What I also I laugh about, Dave, is that no offense taken, but I normally don't present myself as a male nurse. When people say, "So, how long have you been a male nurse?" I say, "Well, I've been male all my life. I've been a nurse for so and so," or I might say, "Well, I've been a male nurse for so and so. Before that, I was a female nurse, but I got bored, and just I'm a nurse."
Yeah, with gender confusion these days, I'm sure they don't know how to take that.
Is
Yeah.
this your second career or was this your chosen career?
This is my chosen career
Good.
and my first. And yeah, one nice thing
Good.
about nursing is that it's you can get stuck in a rut in any field, Adrian. But the one nice thing about nursing is that I don't know any other field like it because it's so incredibly diverse. I'm on a cardiopulmonary unit, but if you get tired of that, you can go to geriatrics, you can go to orthopedics, you can go to
Right.
surgery, you can go to administration, you can go to teaching, you can
Mm-hmm.
go into home care. I've got friends who became part of the IV team. Then somebody else may be an oncology. It's really then there's nurse practitioners, nurse anesthetists, nursing
Yeah.
legal consultants. It's really fascinating. I
Mm-hmm.
know no other field like it.
Very
Uh,
fluid.
and you act like you're really happy doing it, like
Yeah.
you enjoy going to work.
I usually do. Every job has its moments, but I do
There's always
enjoy my job.
politics, of course, too.
Of course. And there's always interpersonal clashes, especially when there's a lot of stress going on. If there's a code going on, people yell at each other, then you just make up afterwards, and
Yeah.
that's just the way it goes. We all have stressful shifts, but it's it's a good field. I do enjoy it, and I feel like it's a very pragmatic and special way of giving back to the community. So,
Okay, your audio is kind of getting a little
yeah.
garbled. So we're going to take
Yep.
a short break. We'll be right back.
Anytime we suffer loss, we grieve. And a lot of people don't realize what even the grief process is. But it could be 5 to 7 steps ranging from denial, I don't believe this is happening, anger, oh my gosh, I'm so upset this is happening, to a form of bargaining, how can I get out of this, to depression, which is a very serious thing because that often leads to suicide. And then finally, after you realize you have no more control over your situation and you're totally okay with the new normal that it brings, that wonderful, wonderful place called acceptance.
Being a caregiver takes a special person with passion and compassion. But even you can become a little burned out from time to time. The Caregivers Caregiver radio show was developed to help you overcome obstacles, adversity, and burnout, as well as just having a place to rest, relax, and recharge your batteries. We've all been there, and you're not alone. Now, you can take the Caregivers Caregiver with you. Get the top 25 radio shows in convenient form that plugs right into your USB car stereo or computer. Learn the techniques, tips, and encouragement we all need to better handle the day-to-day challenges. For around $1 per show, just $29.77. Get the credit card-sized USB card to have with you anytime you need a caregiver's pick-me-up. Just go to DaveTheCaregiversCaregiver.com and order yours today. Go to DaveTheCaregiversCaregiver.com now. Consider it an investment in you, and ultimately, an investment in them.
Okay, welcome back. Jim Dowda, Adrienne Gruberg. And next one?
I think everybody needs to talk. Caregivers and the patients, they all need to talk, get things off their chest. Whenever I come in, I try to get in early enough before Mona goes to work to decompress and share stories from work. And sometimes Mona, my stories can be so crazy about what happened, she just doesn't believe it. Or she says, "Come on." I said, "No, it really happened." And it's easier for me to go to bed afterwards if I can just get off my chest and share it with somebody else, because some of the stories are just so crazy when you're dealing with people. I've heard it said that people can be the greatest blessing and the greatest curse, and I believe that's true, because people can be very good, and sometimes they can be very difficult. But it's good to get off your chest. And if you're a caregiver, you definitely need somebody to talk to. You need to find somebody, because I can't help but wonder if the statistics you shared earlier couldn't be due to people holding it in. I'm sure it's due to other things, but I'm sure that's also one of the major ones.
Yeah. You agree, Adrienne?
Well, you know that I have my special little space on the caregiver space for carping and complaining, because people have no place else to go.
A safe place.
A safe place. Nobody knows who they are. They're totally anonymous. They can say whatever they want to say and get it off their chest. It's freeing.
Do you get a lot of people taking advantage of that, Adrienne?
Yes. Yes.
Now I'm curious, Adrienne, because you're the caregiver, and now you need a caregiver. So there's a caregiver who needs a caregiver, right? So you fall into the 60%. She's been hospitalized, and now she needs a caregiver. So what's it like being on the receiving end? Was it hard to like receive all this help? Is it, wait a minute, something's wrong?
I prepared myself ahead of time, allowing myself to be taken care of. I mean, I knew that that was going to be an adjustment for me.
Mhm.
And I also knew that I needed to be, I needed to fill my caregiver in with the things that he would need to be, like patient, and don't take it personally. I might be coming from a place of pain. It's temporary, you know.
Yeah.
Just the stuff that I experienced, I wanted to share with him so he had the benefit of my experience.
Yeah. So
But it was
how's your physical therapy going, by the way?
it's slow and steady.
Slow and steady. Well, that
Slow and
sounds like a
steady.
formula for. And how's your patience?
My patience is running thin.
Any advice for impatience, Jim?
I'd say a couple of things I'd say is one, remember that we all need help sometimes. We all need help sometimes. You know, it's funny. One time I was driving down the road, and I tend not to give a lot of money to people begging on the side of the street because I know a lot of them will go drink alcohol with it, but there's one guy who had a sign that made me stop and really think, and the sign said, "Everyone needs help sometimes." And I thought, you know what? That's worth a couple of bucks. Go have one on me. You know what? That's very good. And I've never forgotten that. Everybody needs help sometimes. And sometimes I need help. And there have been times that, I can feel overwhelmed in life. I'm a caregiver. I do more like assist Mona as she cares for her family. And my mother just recently died of dementia, of Alzheimer's, and the long-term consequences of that.
Sorry.
And yeah, thank you. So I do have a taste of that. And yeah, we all need somebody to be patient with us sometimes. Like Dave was very, very patient with us as we were trying to set up the computer just now. Thank you, Dave. Because usually
Did you interpret that as patience? Wow, I fooled you.
Usually my son, who's my IT guy who's out of town, is not as patient.
Yes, I noticed that last week.
Yes. Yes.
They have a Wi-Fi password that he wrote it down, and it's like impossible to decipher this thing. He says, "Well, it's a password, you don't want something easy." And I was like, I couldn't figure it out, and I'm pretty cool. They couldn't figure it out. Finally, he calls somebody, just copy and paste it.
Right.
All right.
But you got to find it.
Yeah,
That's right.
Bill Withers said the same thing, with his song "Lean on Me When You're Not Strong," because
Yes.
one day you're going to need somebody to lean on, and I love that song.
Right.
What's next on your list of
Well,
caregivers?
I wanted to ask Adrienne too. Whenever you were in that position where you needed a caregiver, did it change your perspective, or did it adjust your perspective as the caregiver when you yourself needed to be cared for?
It was hard, except, I mean, I'm very self-reliant. So being dependent on someone took a little getting used to. And then after I fell and tore open the wound that I'd had, I fell a month after I had the operation. And then I became fearful. And after I became fearful, I became far more ready to accept the help because I had to pay more attention to my own needs as well.
Mm.
So, that was my contract.
Yeah.
Saying goodbye.
Redoing the kitchen.
Yes.
Well, to answer your next question, Dave, actually, it goes along with what you're saying, Adrienne, is be attentive to pain. In the hospital, we have a strong emphasis on pain is what somebody perceives it is.
Yes.
The patient may not be exhibiting pain as I would normally, but that doesn't mean they're not experiencing pain. So at times we feel like the patient may be looking for pain medication, but that's not ours to judge. If the patient says they're in pain, then we treat the pain and make them as comfortable as we can. It may
Mm-hmm.
not get rid of all of it, but we try to get rid of as much as possible, because if a patient is in pain, they're going to be less inclined to do what needs to be done with rehab or
Rehab.
to be more mobile. And that you can also use that with caregivers too, because even caregivers may be experiencing pain, whether physical or it could be psychological or emotional, or they may be feeling exasperated. But it is what it is. It is what say it is. If you need help, if you need something for pain, I've often wondered why bartenders are stereotypically good listeners. And actually, I've got a nurse I work with who used to be a bartender. And I was asking her about that, her perspective on it. And a lot of it is that people have nobody else to talk to. So they go get a drink and they start this conversation with the bartender because they have nobody else to talk to.
And they just want somebody who knows their name.
Yeah. That would make a great sitcom. Don't you want to just go with somebody who can know your name? Anyway, yeah. So that's my next note.
I wanted to ask you about painkillers, though, with the opioid crisis. I mean, you've got to be super aware of the kind of. I'm asking for a specific reason, because they were giving me OxyContin, oxycodone. They were giving me the long acting and the short acting, and then it wasn't working. So they ended up giving me the long acting, and I bought it. And then I got home, and I sort of lost my mind a little bit.
What does that mean?
And I was not myself. I have no recollection of like 4 days.
You mean you're drowsy, Adrienne, or were you just?
I wasn't just drowsy. I have no recollection of the nurse coming to see me. I have no recollection of turning her away.
You're in a different reality.
And I was in a totally different. I know that Eddie was waking me up 4 times a day to give me painkillers, and I didn't necessarily need them. But finally,
you're on a bad trip.
I was on a very bad trip, and he was very scared because I wasn't the least bit like myself. So we've been discharged from the hospital without the proper mix of meds. So I wanted to know how Jim addresses all of that, because that's very important to decide to take meds.
That's very interesting that you experience this, Adrienne, because that gives you a very real perspective on the opioid crisis we're talking about now. And I'm sure you can see how easy it would be to fall into that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've known people who have chronic back pain who can easily fall into this.
Yeah, Rush Limbaugh did.
Actually, that's one of the people I was just thinking about. And he began doing something called doctor shopping and getting more, because you can develop a tolerance. The thing is now, when I say pain is what the patient says it is, you can only carry that so far, because it comes a point when you have to bite the bullet and you have to start decreasing the pain medication, but that's something that should be between you and the doctor.
Right.
It's a tough call, Adrienne. And as you already know, it's a tough call, because to stay on the pain medication long term at that degree, if you need it, you need it. I don't want to play it down. But the thing is, if you don't need it, then people should wean off as soon as possible, because there are secondary effects, which is actually one of the points I was going to bring out. There's a basic rule of pharmacology that anything you put in your body has more than one effect. Boom.
Yes.
There. Pain medication does get rid of the pain. It can slow your bowels down with constipation.
Yes.
It can get rid of the pain, but can also make you confused, especially elderly people tend not to handle it as well as younger people. You tend to lose your appetite. You may not eat as well. You can be prone to dependence. It's a tough call because we don't want people to be in pain, but obviously we don't want them to become dependent either.
No.
So if a patient can tolerate some pain, you may want to start weaning them down to something that's less powerful, like if they're on Percocet, maybe you can try 2 extra strength Tylenol after a couple of days just to wean down, and your pain may still be there, but if it's tolerable, then endure, and over a period of time it will leave.
Yeah.
But that's a tough call.
No, but that's exactly what I did. I weaned myself quickly, as quickly as possible, off the painkillers.
Yeah.
And that way, I hoped that if I needed it, the Tylenol worked.
Yeah.
You know, when I went back to it.
Right. Everyone needs help sometimes. And as Adrienne actually is a classic example, when she was experiencing what she did through her surgery, and then when she fell and she reopened the area and they had to go through it again. Um, Everybody needs help sometimes. You don't know when you might be injured. My son, just a few years ago, he was, I think, 23, and it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock, and he crawled on the floor to our bed and he said, "Mom and Dad, I need help." This is bizarre. My son is 23. He's bigger than I am and healthy, strong, strapping young man. He was on the floor crying in pain. He was having kidney stones at his age.
Oh, I know what that's like.
Yeah. Now, my wife's family is prone to having kidney stones. My family's not. But my son, again, he's strong, healthy, and he's crawling on the floor because he couldn't stand up. And my wife and I immediately woke up, and we both said, "That's weird that at your age, but it sounds like a kidney stone." So we got up, we rushed him to the hospital, and it was kidney stones, bad ones. And the thing is,
Remember how big?
I don't recall, but they were good sized. But he was able to flush them out, and now he's very careful about drinking more fluids and things of that sort.
Me too.
But
Me too.
yeah, he's a great example that you don't know when you're going to need help. I've had patients who were very young, had major accidents, and they wound up being quadriplegics. Who would have guessed at the beginning of the day, by the end of the day, you'd be a quadriplegic?
Right.
I don't know. Everybody needs help sometimes.
Suddenly.
And so, that's why I always do my little shtick. I says, and the second mistake caregivers make is they don't know how to ask for help. Everyone has one of these. It's called a cell phone. You turn it on, you punch in the number. "Hello, Mom, I need help. Grandma's driving me crazy." Call your mother, call your sister, call your father's ex-wife, call anybody to get over that silly notion that if you can't do it by yourself, you're a failure as a caregiver. That attitude will kill you. And that's my get help spiel. So what's the next one?
You're absolutely right. Okay, is everyone was young once. That also changed your perspective when you realize not everybody was always 80 years old.
Right.
Sometimes when you see a patient in the hospital, we get a jaded viewpoint of aging because we see them in the hospital. But what you don't understand is that there's a huge number of older people who live their lives and they're not in hospitals. And sometimes we get a jaded viewpoint because we don't see them outside, we see them inside. I'll give you an example. One day, I admitted a 93-year-old patient who came in with chest pain. So I was talking to him. I said, "So Joe, tell me what happened." He said, "Well, I just finished riding my bike 5 miles to the ocean where I was doing some barefoot water skiing, and I had chest pain." I said, "What?" I said, "What?" I said, "Joe, back up. There's got to be a story here. You're 93. You rode your bike 5 miles to the ocean while you're doing barefoot water skiing? Come on." He said, "Well, Jim, I realized when I was in my 30s that if I lived a long time, I want to maintain my autonomy, and I had to start exercising. And because of that, at 93, I'm able to do this, where the pain was not cardiac, it was muscular, and he was fine." But I thought, that is a very interesting perspective because we do have a biased viewpoint of aging and other things in the hospital. But that's not everybody. And even so, that's not that whole person's identity. It's a one-time, hopefully, occurrence. So it's, yeah. And the fourth one you were asking me about, everyone deserves dignity and respect.
Yes.
Even if they don't treat themselves as that. Like I've had patients who were drug addicts or alcoholics who can be very manipulative and try to use you to get their next fix or whatever,
Mm.
or they may try to threaten or intimidate. The thing is, even those people who don't treat themselves with dignity and respect are deserving of dignity and respect because they're God's children.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to remember, but I remember that I had one patient, a young lady who was in her upper 20s, who was a drug addict. And I tried to speak to her like I would other people. Now, other nurses were very impatient with her. And there were times I was impatient too, but I tried to cover it up. But after about a week, she was leaving and she gave me a hand drawn card, just, a little picture on a card. And I was reading it and she said, Jim, you're the only nurse who was kind to me. And I was thinking, I
Mm.
felt this big because inside sometimes I was very exasperated with her. And you know what? That made me feel pretty small too, but yeah, you deserve dignity and respect.
I'm just feeling something. I'm seeing a side of you I've never known before, Jim. I mean, you're
It's
married to my
nursing.
cousin, and we've spoken on many, many occasions over the decades. But I'm seeing the nurse side of you, seeing the compassion. If I was in a hospital, man, I want you caring for me. Are you
Well, thank
feeling it
you.
too, Adrienne?
Yeah, I was very fortunate as far as my nurses went. They liked me.
Well, that's important.
Yes.
I was the person, I was like one of the few people on the floor that they liked. So, because I treated them with respect and with gratitude, they were treating me very well. But I mean,
Wow.
it doesn't have to work both ways. I mean, there are an awful lot of abusive patients that I'm sure Jim has to treat with
It's the
respect.
difference between wanting to like you and having to like you.
Like
So
you.
is that true, Jim? Is the minority of the patients who are just kind of delightful, like Adrienne?
Uh, it's the minority that are delightful.
Or do you
Uh,
get a higher ratio because you're so nice and they're just reflecting what you are?
that's a good question, Dave.
I ask good
Because
questions, yeah.
yeah, you should have a radio program. You know that? Because we discussed this actually uh, earlier before we did this, and people will often respond to you as you respond to them.
That's
Yes.
right.
Not always, but frequently. And I do know that I have noticed that other nurses seem to have problems that I don't have.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I thought part of it was because of my size, but part of it could be also that I try to listen to my patients and they don't as much. Or
Yeah.
I try to teach, and I try to just give them a little bit of time to the best of my ability, and many of the other nurses don't. So, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
It could be that they're responding as I communicate with them. That's a
I'm
good point.
thinking of some nurses that I wasn't very fond of over the years. And some of those qualities, quote unquote, that they exhibited were impatience, always in a hurry. They were acting like, I can only give you 30 seconds because I got,
They
15
were.
other people I got to, and they wanted to like just stick me without asking me where I want it or even if I wanted. I mean, one time I was in there with infection and just the doctor says, well, give him this, give him this, give him this, give him this, and I says, I don't want that. It was I forget what it was, but it was just something that I just felt that I don't have a problem with constipation, and I'm not really taking very many painkiller drugs, so I don't want it. And she wanted to give me an injection like in my stomach, and I said, no, I don't want that. If that's just for constipation, I don't want it. And I had to be really adamant about it because she was like, well, I've got to check with the doctor. I says, well, go check with the doctor because
Mm-hmm.
I don't want that, you know. But
That is a great example.
I think you would have handled it differently.
I would have, and I know exactly what you're talking about. The injection in your stomach was probably Lovenox or heparin to keep you from getting blood clots, because just about
That's what
every
it was.
hospital does that
They
now.
worried
Yep.
about my feet and they stuck my feet in these things, and I said,
Oh, yeah.
Yep. The thing is, I myself was a patient a year or so ago, and when the nurse came in, I said, okay, I don't want the Pepsid, I don't want the Lovenox, I don't need it, and I don't want those things on my legs because I'm
You're
up
the
walking
patient,
around.
right?
And the thing is, what the patient needs to understand, and the nurses don't like saying this because when nurses lose their position of being the boss,
Authority.
then it makes it more difficult, and the patient can be more picky. But I tell the patient they have the right to refuse anything they want. If they don't want to do it, they don't have to do it legally. We cannot force you. So often nurses will resort to intimidation or whatever. Like they don't want the hassle of documenting patient refused so and so. But
Right.
if the patient is
Or a
out of bed,
lawsuit.
or a lawsuit, if the patient's out of bed and walking around, you don't need the heparin. You don't need the thing on the legs. So
Yeah.
I don't
And I was
blame you.
walking around.
And if you're having no problem with constipation, you don't need the stool softener. Often, even if you have loose stools, they may still keep giving the stool softener because they're just not thinking about what they're
Yeah.
doing, and it just doesn't make sense.
It's like they're like a robotic, just
Yeah, you're right.
mechanical.
They
Like
wait
they don't have a brain.
until the prescription runs out. Keep using it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Now, I will say this: if somebody is on chronic pain medication, they should do certain things because they will develop a problem.
Yeah.
To keep it under control, but that's not the same thing we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, listen, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. So don't go away. Dave Nasani, the Caregiver's Caregiver, has just released his 6th book entitled It's My Life Too. Reclaim your caregiver sanity by learning when to say yes and when to say no. It was specifically written for caregivers who know they should be putting their needs first, but just don't know how. Dave is the sole caregiver to his wife, Charlene, since 1996. He knows firsthand what caregivers are going through, because he is one. And he now speaks all across the country, offering caregivers his incredible caregiver support package. Even the airlines tell us that in the event of an emergency, to put your oxygen mask on first, before you help your child with their mask. They know that those who don't heed their advice often black out, thus becoming unable to help either themselves or their child. And caregivers are exactly the same way. It's My Life Too. Reclaim your caregiver sanity by learning when to say yes and when to say no. Will help caregivers who are neglecting their sleep, diet, and social life, and learn to put their needs first. Pick up your copy today, or buy one for your special caregiver. On sale everywhere, and at caregiverscaregiver.com.
All right, thanks, Mika. And putting your needs first, that can be really tough for caregivers. And in our Aging Well segment today, we're talking about ways to reclaim balance while attending to others. And joining us early this morning, we're joined in by Dave Nasani. Dave, thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Pleasure.
You're visiting us.
Yeah.
You're an author, you're also a public speaker, but you are also a caregiver.
I am.
And we want to talk about caregiving and that actually putting your needs first, because I think a lot of people, they don't really plan on being a caregiver. I think based on circumstances, they're actually kind of put into that position. I know that was the story for my mom. What's your story?
Well, it's the same thing. It's not on our resume, but 21 years ago, I became a caregiver to my beautiful wife, Charlene. She suffered a massive stroke, left her severely speech impaired, paralyzed on the right side. And in that moment, I had something in common with Henry Winkler, the Fonzie, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Hillary Clinton, and Queen Latifah, all caregivers. So now I host a popular iTunes podcast, the Caregivers Caregiver Radio Show.
Okay.
And I also am a best-selling author, wrote my 3rd book, It's My Life Too, Reclaim Your Caregiver Sanity. And I've been doing, on my National Book and Media Tour, appearing on shows just like this, about
Wonderful.
17 so far. And I'm just sharing my story, and I was even speaking at Harvard with Suzanne Summers.
No kidding.
How to prevent your loved one's illness and disease from actually killing you.
Yeah, and I actually watched that on YouTube.
Really?
Yeah, so that
Good
was
for
really
you.
neat. So what do we have here today? We have an array of things, an assortment of things right on the table.
We'll get to that. I just wanted
Okay.
to share that of the 65 million caregivers who actually are unpaid in the U.S., about 30% of them will actually die before their loved ones do. And the ones that don't die, you know, the lucky ones,
Right.
they will actually become sicker than their loved ones, needing a caregiver of their own. It's just a sad situation. Caregivers make a lot of mistakes.
But what are those mistakes that they
Well,
make?
I'm glad you asked.
Okay.
The first biggest mistake that caregivers make is they don't know how to put their needs first. Now, anytime we go on an airplane, right, the airlines tell us in the event of an emergency, an oxygen mask
Right.
will fall. Put your mask on first before you help your loved ones with their mask. What an amazing metaphor for all of life. Take care of you first, not out of selfishness,
Right.
but out of survival.
And some people just put their needs on the back burner because they're caring for someone else.
They can't help it. That's how we're wired. Second biggest mistake caregivers make is they don't know how to ask for help. Now, everyone has one of these. It's called a cell phone. You turn it on, you punch in the number. Hello, Mom. I need help. Grandma's driving me crazy. Call your brother, call your sister, call your wife's ex-husband, call anybody, but get over that silly notion that if you can't do it all by yourself, you're a failure as a caregiver. That attitude will kill you.
Okay.
And the third biggest mistake is allowing undeserved guilt to affect your decisions. Now, there was a show way back. It was about a caregiver caring for his elderly father in the junk business.
Okay.
It was called Sanford and Son.
Oh, yes.
Well, Fred Sanford was notorious for guilting his son Lamont into doing stuff, so harebrained
boy.
schemes, and that was undeserved guilt. And it went something like this: Oh, it's the big one. It's the big one, son. No, really, Elizabeth, I'm coming for you, honey. And Lamont would fall for that con every single time. And you know what? Caregivers are exactly the same way. It's kind of like being handcuffed to your loved one for the rest of your life, like a prisoner.
Right.
And
the
that
old ball and chain.
That kind of guilt will kill you. So what's a caregiver to do? Well, they're to care. The C stands for communicate with your friends, okay? Caregivers need a life outside of caregiving. Don't isolate yourself. The A stands for ask for help and be specific. Don't, a lot of people have help offered to them and they actually turn it down. Don't do that. The R stands for rest. Caregivers need 8 hours rest every single night.
Sure.
The average caregiver gets 2 or 3. I can't survive on 2 or 3 hours, can you?
No, not at all.
And the E stands for eat healthy food. Eat nutritious food. Don't eat junk food. Junk food has chemicals and sugar and processed ingredients. All that stuff will kill you. And that's why I wrote my book, to save caregiver lives.
And so what is your book, what does it entail? What is it really about, though?
Well, it's my life to reclaim your caregiver sanity by learning when to say yes and when to say no. It's perfect for caregivers who know they should be putting their needs first, but they just don't know how.
Right.
And this book isn't just for caregivers. I like to say there's 3 kinds of people in the world. There's caregivers, there's those who are going to become caregivers, those who are going to need a caregiver. So you can't escape caregiving. It's going to touch you at one point in your life, and now's the time to learn how to be a caregiver when everything is normal, not when tragedy strikes and now your loved one is disabled, you don't have time to scratch your head.
Don't be the victim. Don't be taken advantage of. Put your priorities or put your needs, as a priority as well as the person that you're taking care of.
That's my goal, to raise awareness that caregivers are dying and that we need to save caregivers' lives. And let me just throw in update on my wife.
Sure.
After 21 years, she still can't talk, but she can communicate non-verbally through charades and Pictionary, 2 games I hate, by the way, but I'm learning to love.
He's patient. Bless you, you're patient.
And she still can't walk, but she has now a power chair and a mobility van with a lift, and we can travel literally all over the world. I mean, we come to Hawaii twice a year. We've been here for a month, and she's an amazing person. Anyone who meets her for the first time thinks she's like a cross between Martha Stewart and Wonder Woman, a one-arm wallpaper hanger, and she makes us normal people look like whiners and complainers. And my claim to fame is that I'm the husband of Charlene, and I wear that badge proudly.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you know what, if people want, just to wrap things up, if people want to get in touch with you or they want to know more information, you actually have a book signing coming up.
I do. It's Saturday the 27th at the Waikiki Public Library.
Perfect.
And it's near the zoo. And it's going to be from 1 to 3. I'm going to be speaking on how to prevent burnout. And then afterwards, a meet and greet and a book signing. And then I have a website, a membership website, the Caregivers, or it's caregiverscaregiver.com, because I'm Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver. And I do lots of resources.
Sure.
And so I do uplifting videos and weekly conference calls. I do blogs and
You're a busy man.
all sorts of stuff.
You're a busy man, Dave.
I interview individuals who not only have survived caregiving, but have thrived. And I even do a coaching program.
Perfect. So, Dave, we want to thank you so much for coming in this morning. So you can look for his book signing event that's coming up, and you definitely want to learn how to keep your tank filled up, so you can keep going as well. All righty, Dave. Thanks so much.
Okay, welcome back. Jim Dowda, Adrienne Gruberg. And in the last few minutes, we just want to wrap this up. What else is on your list there, Jim?
Well, I was thinking about one more example of sometimes you may really not like the person you're caring for. That's
Mm-hmm.
true as a, that's true as a nurse,
Gee,
but
that's an
that's
eye opener, huh, Adrienne?
you know what? It's true also. If you're caring for a member of your family, sometimes you don't like them. You really don't like them. And I'll give you an example. And it's an example that I've never forgotten. Uh, and it's an example I hate to share. And I'll tell you. One time I had a patient who came in and he was HIV positive, and his wife didn't know.
Wow.
His wife didn't know. He was having an affair on the side, or affairs on the side, and he developed that. And that was an ethically highly challenging thing.
Mhm.
What is our role? Should we break HIPAA and tell her, which is illegal?
Mhm.
Or, but then again, she is probably already exposed to it. And I've had another patient who found out she was HIV positive after her husband died. What a
Oh.
horrible, horrible legacy. What a
Oh.
horrible legacy. And I gotta admit, I did not like the man. I thought he was a monster. However, I was his nurse. And you know what? Very, very hard. But I tried to treat him like I would anybody else. And I struggled ethically over this, and we discussed it. And the doctors actually had to look into what our roles were legally, and I think some lawyers were in on it, but we couldn't say anything until that was addressed. Um, in any case, it wasn't my job as the nurse. I don't like saying it's not my job, but in this case, it wasn't my role to address
Mhm.
this. It was the doctors, and I think they discussed it with CDC or somebody like that.
Mhm.
But they had the lawyers in to exactly how we should handle this because this is a highly sensitive thing. But the patient, whenever he was being discharged, said, "You know, Jim, you're the only one who treated me with respect." And I gotta admit, the other female nurses, the other nurses, period, didn't like the guy, and they didn't try hiding it. I tried to show camaraderie, whatever, but I gotta admit, I didn't like him either. I thought he was a monster. But that wasn't my
That's what
role.
makes you a good nurse. The
Well,
best nurse, I should say.
well, thank you, thank you. But that was very hard.
Is your wife still there?
No, I think she went out to walk the dog.
Okay.
But yeah, but sometimes it's very hard to like somebody who's violent or somebody who's trying to bite you if it's a confused patient or somebody who does something like this that you know they're just not good people. Or I've had patients who try to fight me. Like, come on, would you stop already? Um, yeah, but it's part of life. But yeah,
It is part of life. Do you deal with therapists? I know you're married to a therapist, but do you ever have an opportunity where the therapist is there and you're there and the patient is there?
You
Or
mean
that doesn't
physical
happen very
therapist or psychotherapist?
physical therapist.
yeah. Not so much
Someone
now
like
because
Adrienne, who just is recovering from knee surgery, for example.
I worked the night shift, but when I worked
Hmm.
day shift, I did. I worked extensively with them. And well, in what capacity are you talking about, Dave? I mean, do you have an example in mind of what you're leaning toward?
Well, sometimes as I remember in the day shifts when maybe the operation is over and you haven't been released yet, and so the therapist, like Charlene, for example, right after a stroke, they started therapy immediately, and so physical therapy and occupational therapy and speech therapy and all that stuff. And I'm just wondering, it just seemed like at times where everybody was around, kind of bumping into each other and the nurse was there as well, monitoring her progress, etc. Is that a common thing, or is that just unusual that you've got therapists and nurses all around the patient?
It could be common, especially on a rehab unit. It could be common because people try to fit their own schedules in because that's the best we
Hmm.
can do. Now we try to accommodate the patient, but in the real world, that sounds nice, but it's very hard to do in the hospital because you all have time deadlines. You've all got certain things that have to be done. So we try to work with each other as much as possible. Um, but that happens, and we just have to make allowances. Like if I'm seeing a patient and respiratory therapy comes in to give a treatment, I can say, guys, if you can give me 3 minutes, I'll get out of here, and then the patient's all yours, and we just try to work together. Yeah, that's going to happen.
So do you do things like trachs and ventilator tubes and feeding tubes and stuff like that? I mean, how serious do you really get? Or is that
Yeah,
stuff for doctors?
I do all those things.
Mm.
I work on a step-down unit where the patient isn't bad enough to be in ICU, but they are not good enough to be on the floor. So we're a step-down unit. So we deal with a lot of ventilators and trachs and feeding tubes and things of that sort. We do that.
Yeah.
And again, like with rehab and other things, as long as you tell the patient exactly what you're going to do, the anxiety level goes down. And even if what you're doing causes pain, they're much more willing to take it because they understand what you're doing. And some of the preparation for different tests are humiliating, and some of them are painful. But if you tell them what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you're looking for, and you promise to share results afterwards, people are very willing to go through the discomfort because they realize the greater good. It's when people are not told what's happening, they have all this unknown, anxiety goes up. Because of anxiety, pain goes up.
Blood
They
pressure
may
goes
become
up.
argumentative. Exactly, heart rate. They may become argumentative. All these things, when a little bit of information goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you love and what do you hate about the graveyard shift?
For starters, we don't call it the graveyard shift.
No, not at the hospital.
That just doesn't fit well in the hospital, Dave.
What do you call it?
Well, it depends on how tired I am and what I call it. But seriously, what I like, the pay is better because it's hard. It does weird things to you physically, and actually, some statistics for you. People who work the night shift tend to die sooner than people who work day shift because they often have chronic lack of sleep. They also tend to be sicker, which is why I'm trying to change the day shift because I've been doing it a long time and it's getting to me.
That isn't
But
just hospitals, that's all professions, right?
exactly, it is.
Oh,
So one of the pluses is that you don't have to deal with as many visitors. And if the patient is causing a problem, you can always give them something to put them to sleep. Now, I don't make that a habit. But if somebody's awake all night, give them something. What they need is some rest. And actually, that would help them during the day because they'll be better rested. Their tolerance will be up, their pain levels will be down, and they do better.
yeah.
But it can be busy, but it's a different kind of busy. And as far as what I don't like, I don't like being jealous of my patients who are sleeping and I'm not. So I think, oh, that looks so nice, sleepy. What is that like?
So in
And
the
then,
last 3 minutes or so, Jim, what kind of take home do you want people to take from this talk that we're having that you maybe haven't already covered?
what I haven't already covered, be empathetic, knowing that unless something traumatic happens, you will be in that position someday. You will be. And then you'll be
Yep.
hoping somebody will be treating you with dignity and respect, will listen, will talk. You'll be hoping the very things that we talked about, somebody will do with you.
Yeah, I
And
always say, there's three kinds of people in the world. You're either a caregiver, you're going to become a caregiver, you're going to need a caregiver. There's no escaping it. Now's the time to learn how to be a caregiver while everything is relatively normal, not after tragedy strikes and your loved one becomes disabled. You don't have time to scratch your head.
That's
And
right.
unfortunately, that's how most caregivers get indoctrinated or drafted into the system. So that's why I tell them, read my book now. It's not just for caregivers. Plug, plug, plug. Adrienne, any questions for our expert
No,
nurse here?
I think Jim's a great nurse.
He is a great nurse. You should
Really
move over here to California in
I'm a
case
great
you
male
have to be
nurse.
hospitalized.
It doesn't matter, male or female. You're a great nurse.
Thank you.
And
Thank
you're
you
a
very
great male.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that.
So if anybody wants to get a hold of you, just contact me, Dave, at caregiverscaregiver.com. And Adrienne, how can someone get a hold of you?
It's Adrienne, ADRIENNE, at thecaregiverspace.org. And
Now,
you'll get me.
Now, Mona is a caregiver and Jim is a caregiver's helper, which makes him a caregiver too. What value, because I'm sure there's others out there, how would you explain to someone like Jim or Mona why the caregiver space is a great place for a caregiver to visit?
Well, between between the magazine and blogs, and we have so many articles, and then we've got the forums and conversations that go on, and then on Facebook you've got private conversations now that we can have where they're not going after your data, and the conversations are confidential.
Is there a limit to the size that you let them grow to, or no?
No, not yet. We might end up breaking up a group. If let's say spousal ended up being too heavy one way or another, we might break it up by sex or disease or whatever. But right now, it's fine the way it is.
You've got groups for when you're no longer a caregiver. You've got groups for cancer, I assume, and
yes, getting back, and of course Alzheimer's and dementia, and parental, long distance. They're all.
So it's not like it was decades ago where you had to actually go somewhere to get really good support. You can get some really good support online now without leaving your home.
Yep.
I don't recommend you just stay in your home because caregivers do need to leave also and get out and have dinner and a movie with a friend that they've been neglecting, or go to the gym that they've been neglecting, or go get their nails done or a massage or whatever. You do all that, right, Jim?
Absolutely.
Okay. Have to take care of yourself.
Yes.
Well, guys, that was awesome. It was a great show despite all of our challenges in technical problems. So I just want to say thank you, and thank you to my audience for tuning in every Wednesday at noon Pacific time. And again, caregiverscaregiver.com, and we'll be here. And thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Bye, Adrienne.
Bye.
Thank you for joining Dave, the Caregivers Caregiver radio show. Make sure you tune in every Wednesday at noon Pacific time and anytime afterwards on podcast to catch more of Dave and his tips to caregivers on avoiding burnout and surviving the grief process right here on the Worldwide Block Talk Radio Network. Goodbye.